Some stories arrive like a whisper, soft, fleeting, and yet so insistent that we cannot turn away from them. The Summer of Ashcroft Hall is one such story. It was born not from careful planning or grand literary design, but from a dream, the dream of a child who is not a child, of a heart that wandered briefly into another time. And perhaps that is where its strength lies. This is not a classic detective tale, though Sherlock Holmes walks through its shadows. Holmes is not the hero here. He is witness, observer, and, at times, a quiet guardian. The true story belongs to a girl named Grace, to her friend Sam, and to a summer that changes them both, in the quiet, inevitable way life itself changes us. It is a tale about courage that grows where childhood ends, about loss that shapes us, about love that remains even when so much else falls away, and about the kind of truth that is not written in books, but in the hand we refuse to let go of when the world grows dark. This foreword is not meant to explain, but to invite into a world of glass and shadow, of memory and mystery, of sorrow and hope. May this story find you as it first came into being, softly, unexpectedly, and with a heart that echoes long after the last page is turned.
They say an estate like Ashcroft Hall has many windows for the light to pour through. Yet no one speaks of the shadows the same light casts. When I was a child, I believed in simple things, in summer fields, in friendship, in the hush of an afternoon that seemed endless. I also believed that a human heart could always be mended. Until the summer a man came to Ashcroft Hall and brought with him all the darkness one life can bear. This is the story of Sam, of my family, of a sword that did not belong to our time, and of a secret even Mr. Sherlock Holmes could not solve, or chose not to. My name is Grace Ashcroft, and this was the summer I first understood what love truly means.
The Summer of Ashcroft Hall, a short story by Benjamin Dawn.
Chapter 1. Ashcroft Hall. Summer at Ashcroft Hall was a quiet kind of happiness. Not the loud, exuberant kind the world could witness, but a softer glow that lingered in the old stone walls. The chestnut-lined drive formed a natural tunnel leading to the main house, and when the wind moved through the branches, it whispered stories from another age. I grew up in those whispers, and in Sam's laughter. Sam Harrow was the son of one of our servants, though none of the adults' talk of class or station ever mattered to me. To me, he was simply Sam, quick, wiry, with bright, curious eyes, and a way of looking at the world as if every moment held the promise of an adventure. That summer afternoon, we lay in the grass behind the stables, where the sun lingered longest. "You do realise your drawing is dreadful, Grace," Sam said, staring sceptically at the crooked sketch of a bird in my notebook. "It's a heron," I insisted. "That is not a heron," he laughed, a sound that struck me each time, like something warm I had no name for. I didn't yet understand what it meant, that his laughter meant so much to me. I was 12, he 14, an age difference that felt like a mountain in the adult world. But when we were together, it felt like nothing at all. I looked at him longer than I should have. He didn't seem to notice, or pretended not to. Behind us stretched the estate, the grand house, the outbuildings, and my father's gallery cottage filled with peculiar treasures from around the world. I loved that place. I loved how Sam looked at everything inside it with the same wonder I felt. I could not know, then, that in just a few days, the first shadow would fall upon it. A shadow that would change everything. Chapter 2. Shadows over the gallery. The afternoon was still warm, yet a strange heaviness lingered in the air, as if summer itself had paused to listen. Sam and I climbed the little rise overlooking my father's gallery cottage. 2 unfamiliar carriages stood outside, black horses stamping the ground. Men who did not belong to us. Who are they?" I whispered, though the question was more for myself. "Not good news," Sam murmured, tension tightening his voice, a rare thing for him. Sam was brave, sometimes foolishly so, yet he sensed something I had not yet learned to fear. Muted voices spilled from the open door of the gallery. My mother's, steady but trembling at the edges, and a man's voice, sharp, deep, edged with irritation. We drifted closer, drawn by the kind of dangerous curiosity only children possess. Through the open window, I saw the stranger for the first time. Lord Maddock, a man with a narrow face, expensive clothing, and the unsettling manner of someone who believed every room belonged to him. In his hand, he clutched a curved, ornate artifact, something my father had sold him only weeks before. "This," Maddock snarled, "is not what I paid for." My mother stood firm, though her fingers clutched the desk so tightly her knuckles paled. "I assure you, sir, you have received exactly what was listed." "Rubbish," Maddock barked, and the artifact shook in his grasp. "Your husband means to deceive me." Then a figure shifted in the far corner. A tall man in a long coat, silent, observing. I recognized him instantly, though I had never met him. Sherlock Holmes. He stood as if he were listening to a piece of music only he could hear. Mother scarcely noticed him. All her focus was on Maddock. Holmes, however, watched the exchange with a cool, analytical gaze. Curious, skeptical, faintly amused. I had no idea then what he saw, but I sensed it troubled him. Sam leaned closer to the window. "I don't like him," he whispered. I wasn't sure which man he meant. Perhaps both. A clatter. A heavy thud. Maddock had slammed the artifact onto the table. Holmes merely raised an eyebrow, as though noting a particularly interesting clue. Sam's hand found mine, instinctively, unconsciously. And in that small, trembling squeeze, I felt something new. Fear. We should have run. We didn't. We stood rooted there while Maddock shouted, Mother argued, Holmes watched. And the summer light dimmed over Ashcroft Hall, though not a single cloud touched the sky. Chapter 3. The Escalation. It happened faster than a single breath. Moments ago, Maddock's fury had been only noise, a storm contained within the gallery walls. But then something snapped inside him, a spark, a fracture, a look in his eyes where reason had burned away completely. I will not be made a fool of, he roared. Mother stepped back. Holmes lifted his hand slightly, not in alarm, but in calculation, as if measuring the exact moment action might become unavoidable. But Sam never waited for calculations. He had never known how to stay silent when someone he cared for was threatened. Before I even understood, he burst through the doorway and into the room. "Leave her alone!" he shouted, his voice far larger than he was. Mother whirled around. "Sam, no!" Maddock turned slowly, as though a child could not possibly concern him. But when he saw Sam, something in his expression changed. Not surprise, injury to his pride. "You insolent little bastard, speaking to me like that." His men chuckled behind him, a soft, poisonous sound. I stood frozen in the doorway, every muscle locked in place. Holmes's eyes flashed, not with fear, but with the grim recognition of a man who realizes he is witnessing something he will not be able to stop. Maddock seized Sam by the collar. "You have no idea who you are dealing with." Sam didn't reply. He stared back with a defiant courage that both terrified and moved me. Then Maddock grabbed the nearest object on the table, a ceremonial figure. Heavy, ornate, deceptively elegant. It rose. It fell. I didn't hear the first impact, only Sam's scream, sharp and short, torn from him before it was cut off. The second blow was a dull, sickening thud. The third was merely a sound the world should never have to know. "Please," Mother cried, "stop!" But Maddock didn't stop. Or perhaps couldn't. Holmes stepped forward, but one of Maddock's men blocked him. Holmes froze, calculating again. Too late. Too late. My legs buckled. I gripped the doorframe to stay upright as the world tilted violently. When Maddock finally released him, Sam collapsed to the floor like a puppet whose strings had been severed. His face. I could hardly recognize it. The silence that followed was worse than the violence. Maddock's breathing was ragged. Holmes stood utterly still. Mother sobbed, not loudly, but in a way that sounded as though something inside her had cracked. "I will return," Maddock growled. "Your husband has debts yet unpaid." Then he strode out. His men followed. Their boots echoed like steps leaving a tomb. I fell to my knees beside Sam. His hand was warm, his eyes closed. Blood traced a line down his temple, darker than anything I had ever seen. "Sam, Sam, please." He did not answer, and in that moment, in that single, shattering moment, I knew that nothing at Ashcroft Hall would ever be the same again. Chapter 4. The Room of Silence. The doctor from town took nearly an hour to arrive, an hour in which Ashcroft Hall seemed to hold its breath, trembling on the edge of collapse. Mother paced the corridor, issuing instructions no one understood, wiping her eyes though no tears fell. I was not allowed inside the guest room where they had carried Sam. "Wait, Grace," Mother whispered. "Please, just wait." So I sat on the floor outside the door. Behind the wood came sounds that did not belong in a home. Hurried footsteps, metal instruments gently striking one another, and, worst of all, faint, broken noises from Sam, as if his body remained while his spirit stood somewhere between here and elsewhere. I pressed my forehead to the wall. "I should have stopped him," I whispered. "I should have screamed, or run, or something." "You could have done nothing, Miss Ashcroft." The voice was so calm that at first I thought it a memory. When I looked up, Sherlock Holmes was standing in the corridor, not as an intruder, but as though he had been there longer than I realized. "Why were you even there?" I blurted. My voice cracked under its own weight. Holmes inclined his head slightly. "Your father contacted me days ago. A buyer questioned the authenticity of a certain artifact, and the matter sounded peculiar. I wished to examine it before the situation escalated." "But it did escalate," I cried, "and you did nothing." Holmes closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, there was something in them I hadn't expected. Not indifference. Grief. "I ought to have intervened," he said. "Or at least attempted to." He exhaled slowly. "But sometimes, Miss Ashcroft, a mind that thinks too quickly becomes a hindrance. I analyzed when I should have acted." We sat in silence. Then Holmes lowered himself beside me, not close, not in comfort, but in respect. "You care for this boy deeply," he said. Heat flooded my face. I don't know, "Yes," he murmured. "You do. That is why it hurts." I said nothing. I couldn't. A long, strained sound came from behind the door. I flinched. Holmes's hand twitched as if he meant to steady me, but he did not touch me. Instead, he said, "You must understand. Any action I took today would only have provoked Maddock further. And the boy..." He hesitated. "The boy placed himself between a violent man and someone he wished to protect. An act of courage seldom rewarded." "He's just a child," I whispered. Holmes nodded. Precisely why it was courage. The door opened. The doctor stepped out, vest askew, hands stained with blood. Mother approached him like someone walking toward a cliff. "He lives," the doctor said. Something inside me collapsed, with relief, fear, hope, all tangled together. "But," he began. Mother covered her mouth. Holmes shut his eyes. I wanted to run, back to the grass, the sunshine, the world in which Sam still laughed. But there was no return. "The boy will be changed," the doctor said softly. "Perhaps profoundly, perhaps permanently." Holmes murmured, barely audible. "And thus begins a different kind of pain." Chapter 5. The Arrival of the Glass Coffin. Father returned 2 days later. 2 days in which time had no flavour, no colour, only a muted heaviness that settled over Ashcroft Hall like dust. No one laughed. No one spoke above a whisper. Even the ticking of the grandfather clock seemed muffled, as though the house itself wished to grieve with us. He did not return alone. When the carriage halted at the front steps, several servants hurried out. Mother rushed ahead, her expression torn between relief and dread. I hovered behind the doorframe, my fingers knotted together, breathing only because my body insisted on it. The driver climbed down and opened the rear compartment, and only then did I realize something was terribly wrong. No luggage, no travel trunks, no crates. A coffin. A glass coffin, bound in copper braces that glimmered weakly in the fading light. And inside lay Eleanor, my cousin. A year older than Sam, 15, spirited, always laughing. The last person I imagined lying motionless behind cold glass. Mother gasped. Father stared at the coffin as if still trying to understand how such a thing could be real. She fell ill on the way home," he whispered. "A fever. They found care for her, but it was not enough." I stepped closer. One patch of the glass was fogged, as if someone had breathed against it. A trick of the light, but it pierced me all the same. Holmes stood apart, half-shadowed beneath the portico. He had not left Ashcroft Hall since Sam's injury. I still did not know why. 2 stable boys lifted the coffin from the carriage. The copper braces creaked faintly, a sound that etched itself into my memory. "Take her to the North Cottage," Father said. His voice trembled beneath its firmness. "It is cool there. She should not be alone." I followed them. The North Cottage smelled of cold stone and lavender oil. They set the coffin on a pedestal, usually meant for sculptures. Eleanor lay as if merely asleep, but the stillness was wrong. Too deep, too final. When everyone left, I remained. "Hello, Eleanor," I whispered. It sounded foolish, but I had nothing else. My breath clouded the glass. I wiped it away, ashamed of the mark I'd made. Holmes entered quietly. His presence did not disturb the air. It folded around him. "My condolences, Miss Ashcroft," he said. I nodded. He approached the coffin, studying it with a gaze that was both respectful and piercing. Why do you all look at her like that? I asked. As if we failed. Holmes tilted his head, considering. Then he spoke with unexpected gentleness. Because grief only exists where love has lived. And you are too young to yet understand that sometimes nothing, absolutely nothing, could have changed what happened. I looked down. She was meant to spend the summer with us. Holmes replied softly, Perhaps she still will, in her own way. Then he left me, and there, between cold glass and warm tears, I understood that summer had broken beyond repair. Chapter 6. What Remained of Sam. Sam did not wake until the third day, or what passed for waking. During the first 2 days, I heard him only through the wall. Laboured breathing, muffled groans, the doctor's shifting tones of hope and helplessness. But on the third day, I was allowed inside. The guest room was dim, the heavy curtains drawn except for a thin slice of daylight. The smell of disinfectant overpowered the familiar sense of Ashcroft Hall. A chair stood beside the bed, its cushions slightly indented. Someone had kept vigil there. Perhaps Mother. Perhaps Holmes. Perhaps both. Sam lay propped against pillows, his head bandaged, his posture askew, as if his body no longer remembered how to belong to itself. His eyes were open. "Sam?" I whispered. He blinked slowly. Then, pushing through fog only he could see, he turned his gaze toward me. A fragile warmth flickered inside me and faltered. There was no recognition, no spark of the boy I knew, only a quiet, searching awareness that saw me but did not quite know me. "It's me," I said. "Grace." He smiled. Not the way he used to, not his crooked, mischievous grin, but a small, trembling, uncertain curl of the lips, more reflex than intention. It shattered something in me. "He hears you," the doctor said softly behind me, and he responds. But speech may be beyond him now, not in the way you remember. I nodded, though the words barely landed. "May I sit with him?" The doctor stepped aside. I lowered myself into the chair, still warm from another watcher. Sam lifted his hand, not precisely, more like a stem reaching toward any hint of light. I took his fingers. His skin was cool, his grip limp. Yet somehow, holding his hand made mine warm. He didn't squeeze back, but it felt as though he was still holding on to me. Holmes stood in the doorway. He made no sound. I noticed him only when the shadow on the wall shifted. "He is glad you're here," Holmes said. I didn't look up. "How can you possibly know that?" "Because his eyes track differently when you speak." Then, softer. "And because affection survives, even when language fails." "But he isn't him anymore." Holmes took a quiet step forward, his voice calm but not unkind. "No one remains unchanged after such violence, not the one who suffers it, and not the one who witnesses it." I wanted to argue. to protest, to insist that Sam had to remain Sam. But Sam lifted his hand again. His fingers quivered. They brushed my hair, as if a forgotten memory were trying to find its shape again. He smiled once more, and I understood something terrible and tender. I had not lost him. I had only lost the boy he used to be. The one he was now was still here, broken, bewildered, but warm. And he reached for me. "I'm here," I whispered. "Even if you can't find your way back, I'll find you." Holmes turned away, perhaps to give us privacy, perhaps because even he could not endure certain scenes for long. Outside, a bell tolled from the north cottage. Someone was visiting Eleanor, and in that quiet moment, I learned something I never wanted to know. There are many kinds of death, and many kinds of survival. Chapter 7. Conversations Through Glass. The northern wing of the estate had always been the quietest place, but since Eleanor lay there, the quiet felt different, denser, heavier, as though silence itself were a presence rather than an absence. I went to the north cottage because I could be nowhere else. Sam slept. Father had folded into himself, as if the two wounds, flesh and soul, were more than he could hold. Mother whispered instructions to servants who no longer knew how to help. Only Holmes moved through the hall like a shadow that neither disturbed nor forgot anything. I pushed open the door to the north cottage. Cold light filtered through the small panes, turning the green outside into a washed watercolour. The glass coffin stood in the centre, like something that had grown from the stones themselves. Its copper braces cast delicate patterns on the floor, like frost. Eleanor lay within, not like the dead, but like someone paused in a story, waiting to be written back to life. I sat on the floor, knees tucked close, and looked up at her. "Hello, Eleanor," I whispered. "It's me again." The room never answered, but it never felt empty. "I don't know why I come here," I murmured. "Maybe because Sam doesn't know me anymore, and Father doesn't know what to do with his grief. And Mother..." I hesitated. "She's trying to keep us all from falling apart." I pressed my forehead against the glass. It was so cold my skin tingled. "I wish you were here. Truly here. Not like this." Eleanor's face was peaceful. Too peaceful. "You know, I think I liked you more than I admitted," I said quietly. "You were older. You knew things I didn't. You helped me braid my hair even when I complained. You called me Little Wasp." A faint smile crossed my lips. "You were awful. In a good way." I didn't know how long I sat there. Minutes, or the kind of long moment that feels like a lifetime. Then footsteps. Holmes stood in the doorway. Not intrusive, not curious, just present. "May I?" he asked. I nodded. He approached slowly, as though nearing a shrine. He studied Eleanor's face with an expression that blended grief and inquiry, as if she were a riddle he could solve, but shouldn't. "I heard you speaking," he said. I blushed. "I only speak because no one minds." Holmes gave a faint smile. "There are truths, Miss Ashcroft, that one can speak only when one believes no one is listening." "Do you have a sister?" I asked. For a brief moment, something hardened in his face, a tiny flicker of pain. "Yes," he said quietly. "I did." We sat in silence, the coffin between us like both a boundary and a bridge. "I don't know what hurts more," I whispered. "That Eleanor is gone, or that Sam isn't Sam anymore." Holmes took his time before answering. "There are two forms of loss," he said softly. "Absence and transformation. The first is brutal in its certainty. The second is a puzzle with no final picture." I stared at him. Which pain is greater? Holmes exhaled slowly. "The one you must understand anew each day." I turned back to Eleanor. Beautiful and unreachable. "Why are you still here?" I asked. "The case is over." Holmes replied without hesitation. "I do not believe it is." A chill ran through me. "Because of Maddock?" Holmes' gaze narrowed. He looked at the coffin again, not its form, but its presence. "For many reasons," he said, "but we shall speak of that another time." He bowed his head slightly to Eleanor, a gesture I never expected from him, and left. I remained, and for the first time, I felt that not only Eleanor, but I as well, lay in a glass coffin, visible, fragile, unable to reach the world that moved beyond the pain. Chapter 8. The Return of the Storm. In the days following Eleanor's arrival and Sam's awakening, the house seemed split in two. Those who suffered, and those too occupied to acknowledge their suffering. Father belonged to both. He looked exhausted, not merely tired, but hollowed, like a man who no longer fit inside his own skin. I often found him in the gallery, staring at the artifact Maddock had slammed onto the table. He polished it, turned it under the lamp, examined it with a magnifier. But no matter how he studied it, his face remained ashen. Because deep down, he knew what none of us wished to say. Maddock would return, and he would not return in peace. I was sitting with Sam, half awake, half drifting inside his new, muted world, when raised voices echoed from the courtyard. Urgent voices, men's voices. I squeezed Sam's hand gently and whispered that I would be back soon, though I wasn't sure he understood. Running into the hall, I saw Father on the front steps, a rolled message in his hand. He was staring at someone approaching from the path. Holmes. Father looked as though the ground beneath him had dissolved. Holmes, by contrast, looked serious but composed, a man carrying knowledge too delicate to be spoken plainly. "Mr. Ashcroft," Holmes began, "we must speak." Father held up the message. "I've already received a communication." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "From Maddock?" Father nodded. His fingers shook. I stayed behind the doorway, listening. Holmes unfolded the note. He read it slowly. His face did not change, but something in his eyes tightened. "He demands an immediate refund," Holmes said. "Yes. And threatens further measures if you fail to comply." "Yes." Holmes lowered the paper. "You do realize this is not about money?" Father didn't answer. Holmes sighed. "Maddock feels humiliated, and men like him answer humiliation with force. You've already seen this." "I will pay him," Father said. Holmes's expression sharpened. "He will ask for more. Then I will pay again. And then?" Father fell silent. Holmes stepped closer, his voice quiet but firm. "You cannot appease this man. He is not seeking justice, nor even revenge. He seeks control, and he will not stop until he feels superior to you." "What would you have me do?" Father burst out, his voice cracking like something long fractured inside him. Holmes replied evenly, "Be prepared." "For what?" Holmes looked toward the tree line, where clouds were gathering like dark wings. "For his return." I felt a presence beside me. Mother. Her hand rested on my shoulder. "We must be strong, Grace," she whispered. "For Sam, for Eleanor, for all of us." Her voice didn't tremble, but her hand tightened, as if she feared I might slip away like everything else this summer had taken. Holmes turned his gaze toward me. "Miss Ashcroft," he said, "I must ask you to stay indoors, and not alone. Will you promise me that?" I nodded, though I didn't fully understand why. Or perhaps I did, somewhere deep, where instinct speaks louder than reason. Holmes faced Father again. "The storm has not yet reached us," he said, "but the wind has shifted. And no one at Ashcroft Hall, not even the youngest of us, doubted he was right." Chapter 9. The Attack. The day Maddock returned was unsettlingly peaceful. Too peaceful. The sun shone warmly over Ashcroft Hall, as if trying to deny the tragedies that had marked the days before. Bees hummed. A distant peacock cried, a sound that felt like a warning, though I didn't understand it then. Sam and I sat in the grass. I lined small stones before him in neat rows. He watched them with an intent fascination, like someone who felt the shape of a game without knowing the rules. "This one is the biggest," I said, pointing to a smooth pebble. I didn't know whether he understood, but he smiled, and that was enough. Then a crash split the air, a violent splintering sound. Even the birds fell silent. I turned. The door to the gallery had been kicked in. "Grace," Sam breathed, or perhaps I imagined it. Father screamed. Something heavy struck wood. Glass shattered. Mother burst from the house. I jumped up, but she seized my arms. Inside, now! But Father, now! It was the voice that admitted no argument. Yet Sam was no longer beside her. He was beside me, clinging to my sleeve like someone who feared being torn away. We ran into the house. Mother gasped for air. "Fetch the stable boys, quickly!" A servant sprinted off. Moments later, heavy footsteps thundered across the courtyard. Jonas and Will, the two strong young stable hands, followed by older staff. I peered out the door. Mother pulled me back. "You stay inside." She meant well, but she underestimated me. The moment she turned, I slipped outside. Sam followed like a shadow. The chaos in the courtyard felt distant, muffled, as if I were underwater. Maddox stood in the gallery doorway, wild with rage, dirt-smeared and sweating. Father lay on the floor, dazed. Maddox's men tore through shelves and tables, searching for something only their master understood. "Where is it?" Maddox roared. "This house will burn if I don't get it back." The stable boys arrived. The fight exploded, frantic, uncoordinated. Furniture crashed. Someone shouted. Someone cried out in pain. I don't know who threw the first stone. Maybe me, maybe Sam. But suddenly, stones were in our hands, and we were throwing them. Sam hit a man's shoulder. The man cursed and stumbled. "Leave him alone!" I screamed. It was foolish, dangerous, but it was all I could do. One of Maddox's men charged toward us. I grabbed Sam's hand, but he stepped in front of me, instinctively shielding me with his battered body. Before the man could reach us, Will tackled him to the ground. A sick thud. Another shout. The fight spilled out onto the grass toward the lake. I ran after them. Sam stumbled once, then forced himself forward. Maddox saw us. His eyes ignited, not with fear, not with desperation, but with something monstrous. "You!" he bellowed, meaning me. He grabbed something, a sword. It gleamed sharply, absurdly out of place in the Victorian sun. It should have belonged to a museum or a legend, not the fist of a furious man. He raised it. I backed away. A voice inside me screamed, "Take it from him." Maybe it was madness, maybe courage. But when Maddox staggered in the struggle, I lunged forward and tore the weapon from his grasp. He stared at me, stunned, and I ran, across the grass, down the slope, toward the lake, the sword heavy and unwieldy in my shaking hands. "Give it back!" Maddox roared. He charged after me. His men hesitated, then followed. I felt Sam's eyes burning into my back. "Grace," he whispered. For the first time since his injury, he spoke my name clearly. Then I reached the water. Without thinking, without breathing, I hurled the sword with all the strength in my small body. A silver arc. A splash. Ripples widening like the rings of a curse being undone. Maddox screamed. He leapt into the water, fully clothed, thrashing, clawing, diving after the blade he could not bear to lose. The men shouted. I could not hear what. Then they fell silent, because Maddox did not return. he vanished beneath the surface. A few bubbles rose. Then the water stilled. His men stared at the lake, and suddenly they were not hunters anymore, only frightened, directionless men whose master had confronted. "Let's go," one muttered. Another nodded, and they left, quietly, shamefully, like children who knew they had done wrong. I stood trembling at the water's edge, my heart hammered, my breath scraped like sand. Sam reached me. He clung to my arm, his eyes bright, clearer than they had been in days. He did not understand everything, but he understood enough. I buried my face in his shoulder. He wavered but held, and the evening descended like a heavy curtain over Ashcroft Hall. Chapter 10. The Sword in the Lake. After Maddox's death, Ashcroft Hall fell into a strange quiet, not a peaceful quiet, but the kind that lingers like a cold breath at the back of one's neck. No one spoke loudly, no one asked questions. Everyone knew something, and at the same time, no one understood anything at all. I still stood by the lake, my hands trembling and wet. From water or fear, I couldn't say. Sam held on to me, swaying, yet steady enough to keep me upright. "Grace!" Mother's voice sliced through the stillness. Then Holmes appeared at the edge of the trees. He didn't run, but he walked with the urgency of a man who was very close to breaking his own rules. Holmes was not someone who ran, but today he nearly did. "Miss Ashcroft," he called. I turned, leaning into Sam for support. Holmes stopped a few steps away. His eyes moved from me to Sam, and then to the lake. "Where is Maddox?" he asked softly. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. My throat felt sealed shut. Holmes stepped closer. His expression held no anger, only sharp concern. "You must answer me, Grace. Where is he?" I lifted a shaking hand and pointed at the water. Holmes followed my gesture. The lake was smooth as glass, disturbed only by faint ripples. Somewhere beneath it lay the sword. And Maddox. Holmes closed his eyes for a moment, not in shock, but in understanding. "What exactly happened?" he asked, quieter now. I told him. Not neatly, not in order. Children don't recount trauma in straight lines. I gave him fragments, pieces. Holmes listened to every one of them. When I finished, he stood silently for a long time. "He jumped in after the sword," he said at last. I nodded. "And you threw it in because you—" I swallowed hard. "Because I thought if he lost it, he'd stop hurting everyone." Holmes exhaled slowly. "Sometimes," he said, "in moments of great danger, people, even children, do things that are larger than themselves. Things no one had the right to expect of them." "Was it wrong?" I asked. Holmes didn't speak immediately. "It was inevitable." Then, more firmly, "And it was not your fault." I shook my head. "But he's dead," Because No. Holmes's voice cut through my words, clear and steady. He is dead because he chased a child with a weapon in his hand and fury in his heart. The lake decided his fate, not you. Tears burned behind my eyes. I wasn't sure whether I wanted the truth or a lie. Holmes suddenly knelt. Now he was at my height, smaller, gentler, more human. Grace, he said quietly, I will not let blame fall upon you. No one will hear this in a way that harms you. Why? I whispered. Holmes met my gaze. Because I saw how you act when others are in danger. Because I saw you protect Sam. And because you are a child. And a brave one. Sam squeezed my hand, as if he understood. Perhaps he did. Holmes rose. We must return to the house. No one is to remain alone out here. I nodded. But as we walked away, I turned back once more. The lake was still. Too still. As if it had swallowed something and chosen never to return it. Chapter 11. The Silence After the Storm. The night after Maddock disappeared, Ashcroft Hall did not rest. It listened. Every creak of the wooden beams made us flinch. Every whisper of wind at the window sounded like someone knocking. No one spoke Maddock's name, and yet he lingered everywhere, like a shadow stretched too thin to take shape. Sam slept fitfully in the next room, murmuring as if his mind was sifting through scattered pieces, trying to reassemble a world that no longer fit. I could not sleep. Not because I was afraid, but because I didn't know what I was supposed to feel. Guilt? Relief? Fear? Or all three at once? I sat by the window and stared out into the night. The lake shimmered faintly in the distance, a dark, perfect disk. Part of it belonged now to the past, and part of it would always stare back at me, whether I faced it or not. A door creaked. I turned. Holmes stood in the hallway, not creeping, not surprising me, but simply there, like a thought that had taken human form. Miss Ashcroft, he said quietly. I nodded. How are you feeling? He asked. I shrugged. I don't know. Holmes approached the window. That, he said, is the most truthful answer one can give. Silence settled between us. Silence with Holmes was never empty. It was like a second room he opened for others to sit in. My mother thinks Maddock rode away, I finally said. Holmes nodded. People often understand only what aligns with their sense of order. It protects them. But it isn't true. No. I looked toward the lake. Will they search for him? Holmes inhaled slowly. Not here. Not soon. Men like Maddock have enemies, debts, unfinished business. His disappearance will first be blamed on those, and even if someone does investigate, he gestured slightly toward the water. Lakes swallow stories long before people do. So, no one will know what happened. Holmes tilted his head. I will know. His voice was gentle. and you will know. And Sam knows in his own way. That is all the truth this matter requires. Part of me felt relieved. Another part felt protected in a way I did not think I deserved. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. Holmes rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Because I do not believe in punishments handed out by coincidence. And because I will not allow a child who acted bravely to bear the burden of a violent man's downfall." He said it with a conviction that felt like a truth he needed as much as I did. Sam murmured again in the next room, a soft, troubled sound. Holmes turned his ear toward it. "He calls for you." "I don't think he—" Holmes shook his head gently. "He calls for you," he repeated. "You are the anchor his memories still reach." My throat tightened. Holmes stepped toward the door, then paused and looked back. "Miss Ashcroft." "Yes?" "You possess more courage than most adults I have encountered." I blushed. Holmes smiled faintly. "But courage," he added, "also means knowing when not to stand alone. Strength is not solitude. Sometimes it is letting someone hold you up." He nodded toward Sam's room. "He needs you," Holmes said. "And perhaps you need someone too." Then he left. I remained at the window for a moment, watching the lake lie still and secretive. Then I opened the door to Sam's room. He was awake, or something close to it, staring at the doorway as if he had known I would come. I sat beside him. His hand reached for mine. I took it. Holmes had been right. There was something in that touch that steadied me. Maybe the day was not an ending. Maybe it was the beginning of something new, something heavy, but not impossible. Chapter 12. Farewell to Eleanor. The day we laid Eleanor to rest was unexpectedly bright. Not warm, not kind, but bright, in a way that almost angered me. How could the sun shine when so much of my world had dimmed? The north cottage stood open. The glass coffin was surrounded by white lilies and 2 candles that flickered despite the daylight. I never knew candles could look sad, but these did. Mother stood in black, father in grey. Holmes lingered in the background near a window, as though he required light to think clearly. Sam sat on a chair someone had placed for him. He looked restless, not fearful, as if he sensed the importance of the moment without grasping its meaning. I stepped toward the coffin. The glass gleamed. Eleanor lay inside, pale as porcelain abandoned by an artist. "Hello, Eleanor," I whispered, for the last time. I placed my hand on the glass, cold as the first breath of winter. "I need to tell you something," I said softly. "I'm afraid. Not of you, not even of death. I'm afraid of what remains, and of what changes." Holmes lifted his head, not because he meant to intrude, but because he recognized the rare weight of words spoken only once in a lifetime. "I wish you had stayed," I continued. "For Mother, for Father, for me, for everything we were supposed to do." My voice trembled. I didn't want to cry. but my tears ignored the command. Sam rose, slowly, unsteadily. He walked to me and placed his hand on the glass beside mine. I looked at him. Not as one looks at the injured, not as one looks at someone living halfway in another world, but as I once had, the boy I knew. His eyes were soft, confused, but warm. Ellen, he murmured. Not her name, but a farewell. A flicker of memory fighting through fog. I pressed my forehead to the glass. Sam did the same. For a moment we stood like two children touching a window to a world moving on without us. Then the ceremony began. The coffin was sealed. The copper braces caught the light. 2 servants lifted it carefully and carried it out toward the family burial ground behind the house. I followed. Sam held my hand, tightly, more firmly than I expected. The cemetery was small. Old stones, worn smooth by time. Eleanor's grave lay beneath an oak tree whose branches hung like open arms. As the earth fell upon the coffin, I heard a sound beside me. Holmes. A quiet clearing of the throat, not theatrical, but as if he were wrestling with words. "Miss Ashcroft," he said at last. "It is not death that shapes us. It is what we carry for the dead." I inhaled sharply. "And what do I carry?" I whispered. Holmes met my eyes. They softened, only slightly, but enough. "Love," he said, "and courage, and loss. Everything that truly forms a person." Sam leaned his head against my shoulder. I wrapped my arm around him as naturally as breathing. "Come back to me, Sam," I whispered. "I'm here." Holmes heard. He did not smile, but something in him shifted, as if he understood that some things are not sustained by logic, but by love. As we walked away from the grave, the day remained bright. But inside me, something had cleared. This summer had taken 2 people from me, but it had returned one, not as he was, but as he could remain. Chapter 13. Epilogue. A summer ends. The summer that had taken so much from me and given so much back ended quietly. No final storm, no dramatic sign from the world, just a change in the light. Morning sun grew softer, evenings cooled. The oak tree over Eleanor's grave cast longer shadows. Ashcroft Hall slipped back into its routines, but they were not the same routines as before. Sam improved, slowly, tenderly, like someone relearning a familiar song, note by fragile note. He could walk short distances on his own. He laughed, sometimes out loud, though without reason. Some days were bright, others were locked doors. But he was here, and I was here. We found a new way of being together. Holmes stayed for several days, not because he had to, but, I sensed, because he needed to finish something that would never appear in his case files. He and Father spoke long hours in the study. I overheard Holmes' calm voice, followed by Father's weary, grateful murmur. Holmes said nothing about it. He said almost nothing at all. But on his final day, he asked to speak with me in the garden. The afternoon was still. One bird sang in the hedge. Sam slept in the shade of a bench. Holmes stood where Sam and I had once lined up pebbles. "Miss Ashcroft," he began, "I will be departing today." I had expected it, yet it pinched at something inside me. "I wish to tell you something," he continued. "Not as an investigator, not as an adult to a child, but as someone who sees you." I blinked up at him. Holmes looked different, more open, almost gentle. "You saved this household," he said. "Not through strength, not through knowledge, but through something many adults lose long before they understand it. Courage born of love." My cheeks warmed. His words spoke not to my age, but to something older within me. "I'm afraid it's all my fault," I whispered. Holmes shook his head. "Fault and responsibility are very different things. You carry a weight that was never yours to bear. I tell you this not to comfort you, but because it is the truth." I looked at my hands. They felt smaller than they had yesterday. Holmes bent down slightly, bringing himself to my level. "And if, one day, you believe that what you did has broken you, remember that it also saved someone." I turned toward Sam sleeping in the grass. Holmes followed my gaze. "He lives," Holmes said softly. "More than you realize." He straightened. "I will take my leave now." "Will we see you again?" I asked. Holmes smiled, a real smile, brief but unmistakable. "The world is not as large as it appears," he said. "And some stories cross paths more than once." He lifted his hat, nodded, and walked down the gravel path, his coat stirring in the quiet breeze. I watched until he reached the woods and vanished. Sam woke and wandered to me. He rested his head against my shoulder, imperfect, uncertain, but warm. I took his hand. "Come, Sam," I said. "The summer is over." And as we walked back toward the house, I knew. Summer had changed me. It had taken things from me and given others in return. It had frightened me and made me stronger. And while the first leaves began to turn, a quiet thought bloomed in me. Perhaps something had not only ended, perhaps something new had begun. Something without a name, but with a home.
This was The Summer of Ashcroft Hall, a short story by Benjamin Dawn. Thank you for listening.